Last week we watched a film that featured a car chase in San Francisco. This week we watch a movie that features a car chase in San Francisco. Tonight we review the $800 million turd in the wind known as Venom.
I'm Eddie Brock. I'm a reporter.
Knock.
I found something really bad.
Knock, knock, knock. Let the devil in.
I have been taken. We cannot hurt people.
The way I see it, we can do whatever we want.
What the hell are you?
We are Venom.
Knock, knock. Let the devil in.
Venom.
This is the Superhero Pantheon, and on this podcast we take one superhero film a week and decide whether or not it should be in the Pantheon, the pile of shame, or somewhere in between. My name is Brian DeBrain, and you can find me on Twitter at Brian DeBrain. You can find additional episodes of this podcast through Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and all your favorite podcast apps through the real world. We strongly recommend you leave a 4 or 5-star review as to help people discover this show and the great work the folks at the real world are doing. If you would like to interact with us, you can send feedback to our email at superheropantheon@gmail.com. Second, you can find us on Twitter at HeroPantheon. I kind of took over the hosting reins this week. My co-host this week is Jerome Cuson. He can be found on Twitter at JeromeC1985. And I know last week we kind of mentioned at the tail end of the episode that I don't hate this movie. I think Jerome does hate this movie. But I can safely say that I think after this podcast, both of us will never watch this movie ever again. We don't have a need to.
I have no interest in watching this movie ever again. I still really do not like this movie. There are aspects of it that I appreciate that we can get into, but what I want to say right off the top is, and I think that this closely relates to what I want to say about Joker as well, because these are two of the most successful comic book movies of the last couple of years, and they have very unique takes that are different from the MCU. And part of what I'm disappointed by is I like the fact that Venom and Joker are different. I just wish they were good. Because the problem is like, I don't want the MCU to be the only way that we tell superhero stories, because I think that's going to get really, really boring. And I want to see different versions of these characters, and I want to see R-rated superhero films, and I want to see movies that are funny and play in different genres. I just wish Venom and Joker were good so that we could have a better conversation about them, because I know that there has been a great deal of conversation the last few weeks about cinema and superheroes and how it's taking over, and I know there's been a lot of discussion about Martin Scorsese. I don't really have a lot of interest in partaking in that because, as far as I'm concerned, when you are Martin Scorsese and you have literally created some of the greatest films of all time, and you are still a prolific filmmaker that is challenging the way that we do movies and pushing technology and doing all this stuff, you get a lot of leeway that other people might not get. So, to me, what I want to see with these movies is I want to see something different. I don't want them all to be the same, but I also want them to be good too.
Totally agree. I think the problem with this movie in particular is that, I mean, the idea that doing a Venom movie, and I know fans got kind of confused by it, but the idea of doing a Venom movie without Spider-Man, because their histories are so intertwined, it's just like, it's almost like you can't do one without the other, right? So that's kind of my, I don't know, my conflict with the movie, like going into it, just being frustrated that there was no Spider-Man. I kind of convinced myself that Tom Holland would show up in this movie, like in the end credits or something, just to have that connective tissue to the MCU. But by the end, you kind of realize that this is kind of its own world. And if they want to, they can kind of shoehorn in some things to kind of connect it to the MCU. But we can talk about that in the burning questions. But let's kind of give a brief history of Venom as a character. We all know that he was in Spider-Man 3, but he actually first appeared in the Marvel Comics as the alien costume. He wasn't even called Venom. He first appeared in 1984. I thought that was kind of a really interesting fact. And the fact that he reappeared 4 years later in the comic, but they actually called him Venom then. So it's kind of like a kind of like a Jason Voorhees kind of thing, where he didn't actually get his mask until the third movie. He doesn't actually get his name until 4 years after he debuts. So I thought that was kind of an interesting note. As you know, like he's a very popular character, like very, very popular. Probably Spider-Man's number one arch enemy in terms of popularity. I would say in terms of like equivalent to the Joker for Batman. I would say this is just kind of my personal opinion, but kind of seeing the way that people respond to certain villains, he's definitely at the top of the list for the Spider-Man Rogues Gallery. So that's kind of why I guess they had this idea of even doing a solo movie even in the 90s. I know the Spider-Man animated series kind of ended around, I think, 97, 98, so around this time is where they were thinking about doing a Venom movie. Actually, like Dolph Lundgren was kind of rumored to play Venom around this time, and in 97, David S. Goyer, one of our favorite writers, as you know, wink wink, um, wrote a script for Venom, like a first draft, with New Line kind of eyeing to produce it, but it kind of went nowhere. But I can't imagine Dolph Lundgren, who was already the Punisher, portraying Venom, Eddie Brock. I mean, he's kind of got the look, I get it, but with that accent in a movie without Spider-Man, because again, it had no plans to have Spider-Man, I think it would have just been a total bomb, and I don't even think. I think it would have been worse than Punisher, and we'll review that next year. But yeah, that's just so mind blowing that Dolph Lundgren is Venom. Wow. But as you know, time goes on. The Spider-Man Sam Raimi trilogy goes on, starts in 2002. We reviewed those movies in the past. Spider-Man 3 comes out. They want to kind of branch off. Sony wants to kind of do more of this expanded universe, and they have these ideas to do a Venom movie, which is why they kind of shoehorned in Venom in Spider-Man 3, kind of against Sam Raimi's wishes, which we all know, which we talked about last year. And, it bombs. And Topher Grace was like one of the worst, probably is the worst on-screen version of Venom out of the few we've had, and was just terrible. Everyone hates it. I hate it. We've talked about how it's in the pile of shame. So yeah, and then they still had this idea of doing a Venom movie, even still, like after like Sam Raimi kind of leaves the project or leaves the franchise and they start to reboot it. They figure, okay, we'll do an Amazing Spider-Man, which they did, which got decent money in 2012, which we also reviewed. And the idea was, hey, maybe we can kind of expand and make our own little MCU style universe. We'll do a Venom movie, introduce them after Amazing Spider-Man 2, and kind of have this expanded universe. We can do Sinister Six, all this kind of stuff. Amazing Spider-Man 2 comes out, bombs. Plans are scrapped once again, so they don't know what to do. 2015 comes along, they work out the deal with Disney and Sony working together. They give Spider-Man to the MCU, let them basically rent him out for a high price. And they kind of figured, well, we'll still make a Venom movie, even though we don't have Spider-Man. And it still was so confusing at the time when they announced it because, hey, is this going to tie in with the MCU? How is this going to work out? And then they announced Tom Hardy in 2016, and everyone's like, okay, we'll see what's up. And then the trailer came out the next year, and everyone's like, oh boy, here we go. And then 2018 comes along. They release it in October, and it makes $850 million worldwide somehow, and we're off to the races. And, Ruben Fletcher, director of Zombieland, got the gig. Everyone likes Zombieland. Some of his other stuff, not so much, depending on who you are. I didn't watch Zombieland 2 yet. I'll probably wait till it's streaming. But just a weird series of events culminating to a Venom movie that turned out kind of mediocre. But, we'll talk about that in a second. But just your thoughts on the whole history of Venom and how it came to be.
I heard a great line about David S. Goyer, and I'm trying to remember it. I almost think the line was something like he is a nostalgia profiteer. And I think that is one of the best ways to describe David S. Goyer because he has been involved in so many properties. He's been involved literally with both Marvel and DC fairly consistently. And there are some movies of his that he's been involved with that I like, and there's been a lot that I definitely have not. I think perhaps most infamously for me, I think back to Blade Trinity. That seems to be David S. Goyer at his purest as both the writer of the movie and the director, and that is undoubtedly the worst of the Blade movies. So I am so glad to see that he has created a script and it never went anywhere because, quite frankly, that's kind of how I feel about David S. Goyer, and I think he should be kept away from superhero movies literally at all costs. When you talk about Spider-Man 3, a couple things that are worth noting. Spider-Man 3, although it is detested by you and I as well as so many other people, it did make $890 million at the box office, which makes it the most money gaining of the three Spider-Man movies. So despite the fact that we don't like it, to call it a bomb would be incorrect, I would say. And also, Brian, it came just short of the pile of shame. It is bad, but we did not put it into the pile of shame.
Well, it certainly felt like it, but yeah, it's not a bomb technically, but it did kind of kill the franchise in terms of like its fan base. So
It killed Sam Raimi's interest in continuing the franchise because he very shortly thereafter dropped out, and that's why they had to reboot the Amazing Spider-Man, and then eventually those plans kind of petered out and petered out. I see what I did there. And then we get the MCU version of Spider-Man, and then whatever Sony's doing with Venom, they certainly had ideas.
ideas indeed, and aren't the best puns come when you just don't, plan on them?
I think that's what we found out a couple weeks ago when you made a lot of Incredibles puns and when you made a pun about Ant-Man last week. That's what we do.
All right, let's go on to the heroes. Eddie Brock, portrayed by Tom Hardy, quite the casting choice, and I mean, I can't even tell where this guy's from in this movie. His accent is wild. It's all over the place. They do say that he's from New York, which I found interesting because he does mention the Daily Bugle, um, which I think is like the alternate, was it the alternate newspaper to, um, what is it, the J. Jonas Jameson paper? I'm forgetting. I'm blanking on it right now. But it's supposed to be like, the New York Times and the Daily News kind of thing. So I thought that was kind of interesting. They tied that together because I think there was some comic book storyline where Spider-Man took a picture over to the Daily Bugle or whatever, and kind of made a bidding war for Jameson, and then Jameson gave him an exclusive contract. So I think that was a nice little tie into there. But yeah, he kind of ran away from something in New York, so it could be something Spider-Man related. We don't know, but of course, this is some weird timeline where I guess going into space is like a new thing for them. Even though if this was supposed to be in the MCU in the same universe, that they would have already had like alien invasions in 2012 or whatever. But whatever, that's the writing. But Eddie Brock, man, he's weird because he's not exactly a smart journalist. He's really, I don't know. He's got self-destructive behavior. They show clips of him having his YouTube show or whatever, investigative reporting. He seems like he's doing a decent job asking the right questions on camera, but when he actually interviews Carlton Drake at the beginning of the movie, he's just purposely self-destructive and asking the wrong kind of questions and snooping and using illegal information that he wasn't even supposed to have and asking questions about certain court cases or whatever. So to me, like Eddie Brock's not even that great of a journalist. He's just kind of being self-destructive and purposely putting him in self situations where he tries to blame other people when he really put himself in that situation. So, and because of that, Carlton Drake costs him his job. He breaks up with his girlfriend Anne, played by Michelle Williams, and she's just kind of there in this movie. She's kind of like the love interest and gets the symbiote later on in the movie for about 5 minutes. And 6 months later, he becomes Venom when the symbiote comes and finds him. So it's just weird because he's like acting all over the place. It feels like he's in this Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde type B monster movie kind of thing going on. And I see what they're going for, but it just doesn't fit this. And I don't know if that's the right approach. I do like the idea of the approach, but the actual performance just seems wacky.
See, it's fascinating you say that because I know that there are a lot of people who love Tom Hardy in this movie. And the one thing that I am going to give Tom Hardy a ton of credit for is that he is clearly going for something. I don't know if that's going to be successful or not, but he's at least trying to do something very different from almost any performance that you would see in a superhero movie. And this is kind of what Tom Hardy does. He does weird accents. He wears weird stuff on his face. This is just what he does. I mean, if you look at the history of his career, when have you ever seen a quote-unquote normal Tom Hardy performance? This is who he is as a performer. And regardless of what you think of that, he is at least trying to do something in this movie that is so unique compared to so many other actors. Now, when we think about the rest of the movie, it does not make sense. This movie is both seemingly trying to be a B movie, which is kind of harkening back to Sam Raimi. That's how Sam Raimi, I think a lot of how Spider-Man feels at times is like a B movie, but there is a certain panache that Sam Raimi is able to bring that Ruben Fleischer simply is not. Ruben Fleischer is somebody who directed a really good movie in Zombieland, and then if you look at the rest of his career, he has not made a really solid film since then. I think Zombieland 2 is good. I think there are elements that are pretty solid, but even that is pales in comparison. I think Ruben Fleischer, to an extent, as far as storytelling and technical execution is kind of a one-hit wonder at this point in his career. So when I think about the heroes and I think about Tom Hardy, I have to almost separate him from the rest of the pack because he is so unique. Everyone else in this movie is almost irrelevant, and that goes for Michelle Williams. That also goes for Jenny Slate. Jenny Slate is a tremendous comedic performer, and she is wasted as a scientist in this movie, and that is extremely disappointing. And just the random mood swing of Venom from deciding that at some point it wants to at some point destroy the Earth, and then in the last 20 minutes decides to save Earth. We almost get a little bit of sexy time between the symbiote and Eddie Brock, which is fascinating on a number of levels because superhero movies over the last few years have rarely gotten into the sexy category, and I think that was at least interesting as well. So when I think about the heroes, this is going to be my highest score. I am giving this a 4 for the reason is that there is at least some interesting stuff going on with Tom Hardy. I think the most famous scene, of course, is the scene where he goes into the lobster tank. That is going to be in his montage at the Oscars when he passes away. That is the moment that they need to show because nothing that he did is either Bane or in any other Christopher Nolan movie will compare to him being in the lobster tank.
Yeah, that's why last week I mentioned this movie wants to make me eat lobster. Like, that was the scene I was referring to, straight up. I just want to, like, kind of compare him to Nicolas Cage. It felt like he was doing this Nicolas Cage type thing where even in, like, the worst movie, Nicolas Cage is going for something totally unique just for that movie. So, yeah, credit to Tom Hardy and respect him for that. And everyone else is kind of like, just there. So I'm going with a 5 just because I felt like I was gonna give it like a 3 initially, but then I just kept watching this performance and just being like, you know what? Credit to him, man, because he's trying and he's working his ass off to make this movie work in some kind of weird level. Even though his performance seems totally out of context, seems like he's in a totally different movie than everyone else in this movie. But I mean, what can you do? So, on to the villains. Carlton Drake. He's slash Riot, I guess. He's a multi-billionaire, trillionaire tech billionaire that recently became rich. He's like what 25 or something like that, or is supposed to be. Well, he opened the company when he was 25, but he's kind of one of those young tech billionaires. I find it kind of funny that, or maybe it was purposeful that it takes place in San Francisco, very close to Silicon Valley and that whole young, rich, upstart kind of area. Um, it was just weird because like it just seems like he has no background, and even when they were trying to give him a background, it's like okay, there's still all these questions like who is this guy? You know what I mean? And why is he so like such a sociopath? Because he lacks empathy. He clearly lacks empathy because he's using human trials on a lot of things, and all these scientists are just going along with it instead of calling the cops. And you would have thought that someone would have called the cops by then. You know what I mean? If they're doing all these human trials, but hey, it's a comic book movie. Everyone's fearful of their job, and apparently, Dr. Jenny Slate thinks that he's somehow controlling the cops because that's why she never went to the cops and went to Eddie Brock initially. So there you go. But his performance is just kind of like subdued. He barely gets angry till the end. He only gets kind of angry when he's Riot. But he's just obsessed with like going into space for some reason. And that's the thing. Like, there's no explanation as to why he wants to go to space. He keeps saying that we trash the Earth and that we're on the brink of extinction and that we just take. And I guess that's kind of true or whatever. But there's got to be some other reason. Like, there's no background to him at all. I'm assuming it's something family related, but we just don't get that. So it's like this phony kind of villain, you know what I mean? He's just kind of there, and he's saying like the typical, stereotypical tropes of a supervillain, like the Earth is bad, and humans are bad, and we gotta escape the Earth, and blah blah blah. He finds the symbiotes, and then he just tries to like use human trials and put symbiotes and humans together, and and then there's even a line that Eddie Brock's like, you mean he's trying to combine humans and aliens together? That's nuts. So yeah, this whole concept of the movie's nuts, but at least they're trying, I guess. But let me get his name. Carlton Drake is played by Riz Ahmed. He's the pilot Bodhi from Rogue One. He's a great actor, I think. It's just that this role is not meant for him, and I guess it was meant to be this. They wanted a young guy to play this young tech billionaire, but it didn't really come off as much. Came off kind of empty, and I think he's a sociopath.
I am a big Riz Ahmed fan, even though I think The Night Of is a limited series on HBO that kind of petered out at the end. I really liked his performance in it. I really liked him in Rogue One. Rogue One is a movie that at some point we need to reevaluate because Secretly, I think it might be my fourth favorite Star Wars movie, but that's a whole conversation for another time. Riz Ahmed is great, and it just felt like he was miscast. To be honest with you, as I was doing this rewatch, and especially because I've seen Spider-Man 3 pretty recently in the last year or so, I really saw a lot of the same DNA in both the character that Topher Grace plays in Spider-Man 3 and Riz Ahmed plays in this movie. They're kind of going for the same vibe, even though they're obviously very different in the execution. They're both kind of these wimpy dudes that get these powers and then decide to go full evil on everyone. I kind of wish that they had just gone with the combining aliens and humans thing and just go all the way with it and not try to shoehorn this weird message about consumption, because it is this very lazy trope that a ton of movies over the last few years have done. Specifically, I can think of Godzilla from this year that absolutely did this. There's other movies that if I look through a list, I could probably tick down a list for you and do that. It's very lazy storytelling. And yes, there is a lot that could be said about climate change. Unfortunately, when you are a movie like Godzilla or Venom, you just don't have the space to say it because you are a B movie. And I wish that everyone other than Tom Hardy was embracing the fact that they were in a B movie. If they had done that, then I think I would have enjoyed this. Now, ultimately, it doesn't matter. This movie grossed $800 million worldwide. There's going to be a sequel next year. So this all kind of is moot, but I think people would be more interested in continuing with this franchise if this movie was actually good, because I am very skeptical about how well the sequel is going to do given the quality of this movie. But in considering the villain score, I am going with a 3 because I did appreciate Riz Ahmed. I kind of liked some of the scenes with Riot and with Venom, and even when Eddie Brock was talking to himself and Venom was kind of more of in the villain role, I did like some of those moments. And again, I just wish that they had embraced the full B-movie nature of what was happening.
I'll go with a 4 just because I think at least Riz Ahmed tried to do something with the performance. I don't know how the direction was, but you're right. At least he tried. So, and then yeah, Venom. It was kind of the bad guy at the beginning of the movie. So, and it's still weird to me that I guess he just learned how to speak English. But that's one of those things, even in Marvel movies, that aliens are just speaking English, right? So there you go. Let's go on to the story. We kind of laid it out already. Basically, Carlton Drake sends people into space. Quick little note. The astronaut that gets inhabited by the symbiote the first time as it crashes is John Jameson, which is supposed to be, if you kind of figure things out, J. Jonah Jameson's son. So if you want to shoehorn that in, I guess you can do it right there and kind of blame, this guy for his son's death or whatever if they want to do that. If you even want to say that, hey, this takes place like a year or two after the events of Endgame, which would make it like 7 years post snap, I guess you could do that as well, but it would, I don't know, just the fact that Ant-Man and Venom in the same city just kind of makes no sense to me, and they never run into each other or whatnot, but whatever. That's if they want to shoehorn it in. So basically, I guess Riot, the leader of the symbiotes, eventually crosses over from Malaysia all the way to San Francisco 6 months later, inhabits the body of Carlton Drake, and basically wants to take millions of symbiotes from the comet that they found them on and take them to Earth and just take over Earth, right? Venom, I guess he was kind of one of his henchmen, decides that he loves being in Eddie Brock's body, he likes being on Earth, he loves tater tots and chocolate, so he wants to stay and decides in the last 20 minutes, hey, let's not destroy Earth. I like chocolate and tater tots. So that's kind of basically the plot. For the last 20 minutes, they fight on a spaceship that's about to launch. And, lo and behold, Eddie Brock wins the battle. Carlton Drake gets destroyed. And there's no more symbiotes on Earth for now. For now. And that's basically the plot of the movie. Michelle Williams is the love interest, and she plays also a lawyer at the beginning of the movie that gets fired because Eddie Brock kind of pokes his nose into some things he wasn't supposed to. And like we talk about those in the interview he had with Carlton Drake and asking about those cases with those people that he wasn't supposed to be asking about, and that's why she got fired. So she's just kind of there, but she does come up with a smart idea at the end of raising the sound levels, which we saw in Spider-Man 3. It's like directly from that where the high noise levels freaks out Venom, the symbiote, and kind of leaves itself from the human host. So they do that to kind of get at Carlton Drake, and they win the battle at the end. That's basically it. It's such a simple story put together, and it's not really interesting, but they go for so many different things, like you mentioned with the climate control and how humans are bad or whatnot. But it just feels like tropes. You know what I mean? Nothing really of substance when they talk about those things. You got, Eddie Brock going in a fish tank or the lobster tank doing crazy things. There's some comedy here and there. There's some comedy with a dog. Um, does that little girl die? I don't know. Did they kill a little girl in this movie? I don't know, because it seems like every time a symbiote leaves a host, they die. So if we're to imply that, I guess that little girl did die, killed by Riot. So just a weird story all around. And again, no Spider-Man. Just it feels like there's a big empty hole in this movie, and that's because of that. So I don't know how you feel, but right off the bat, I'm going with a 4 again. Just yeah, I wanted Spider-Man so bad in this movie; it needed it, and to me, it just felt so. It felt missing something, and that was it.
I am really glad that Tom Holland is not in this movie because this would have. I don't know if it would have done damage to the Spider-Man brand, but I certainly don't think it would have helped. And this is undoubtedly the worst category for me because I think the story is borderline ridiculous. I mean, it is ridiculous, and it fundamentally does not work for me. The actual plot of the movie, there are certain moments that I either get a chuckle about or enjoy, but this movie is 2 hours long, and it is excruciating trying to get through this movie and just going through the plot mechanics. Eddie Brock is really terrible at his job, and he's so bad at his job that he gets his girlfriend slash fiance fired. They break up, and of course we know they're going to end up together at the end, or maybe not. But it's one of those things where just everything about the plot of this movie feels like it is straight out of the 1990s. And the fact that Avi Arad is one of the producers of this movie and seemingly had a lot of involvement is proof of the fact that the way that they're telling stories in this case doesn't work. And the fact that Venom is a character that is a byproduct of the 1980s and 90s, I think is more proof of that. And to me, if you are in a situation where you have a Marvel project that has the heavy involvement of either Avi Arad or Ike or Jeff Loeb, then you are basically in a situation where it's going to be really dicey how good or bad that piece of property is. Because I think if you look at what they have done, there is a reason that Kevin Feige is essentially in charge of everything Marvel now. He has creator control over every aspect of things, and it's easy to see why when you see the Marvel Netflix shows and how things turned out there, and a movie like this, and even some of the X-Men movies. Avi Arad is definitely a byproduct of the 1990s, and it shows with a movie like this that feels like it is 25 years past its prime.
Right, and I did feel like it was in like the same Fantastic Four universe as well. And of course, in the mid-credit scene, we got Carnage, played by Woody Harrelson. Well, excuse me, not Carnage yet. Cletus Cassidy, who becomes Carnage, and that was the setup for the sequel. So there you go, with his red hair and everything. What was your score again for the story?
My story score is a 2. I think this is easily the weakest and worst aspect of this movie. This movie easily could have lost 25 minutes and been so much better for it.
Yeah, again, I'll go with the 4 just because I think what I really liked about the script was the internal dialogue stuff, but then again, they didn't really go too far with it. But it was kind of interesting for the have him like talking to himself, so that was fine. Technical wise, this is not a good looking movie, to be honest. Like, it's very simple looking. Okay, so I mentioned in the beginning that this takes place in San Francisco, just like Ant-Man 2, which we reviewed last week. But somehow they made San Francisco look so much better in that movie, and this movie also takes place in San Francisco. And yeah, they're shooting the streets, and you see the hills and stuff like that. And that's kind of like the common thing you do when you're shooting a movie in San Francisco. It's like emphasize the streets and kind of do, that's why there's car chases a lot in movies in San Francisco. But I'm just kind of tired of it because it's like the same thing. We're going to jump off this high hill and the car's going to go down a little bit and kind of hit the ground a little hard, but it's going to keep going. I'm just kind of sick of that. And they had this extended 15-minute chase sequence in this movie that, I don't know, even in the dark, it didn't really look good at all, but at least the chase sequence in Ant-Man 2 looked really good in the daytime, and they kind of had fun with that. But here it was just like, we'll have CGI arms here and just have them fly in the air. It wasn't that too creative. The soundtrack wasn't that creative at all. Wasn't memorable. Eminem had a song at the end. It was a good hit for about a month or two. And I guess that would be technically his second song he's contributed to a soundtrack, the other one being 8 Mile. I'm not sure in the other soundtracks he's contributed in the meantime, but it did remind me of like, oh, hey, it's an Eminem track. It's like an 8 Mile kind of ending, but whatever. But other than that, that was like the only memorable song in it. I can't even hum the theme of Venom in my head. Usually a good soundtrack, obviously, you're humming that theme in your head because it's so good and catchy. Here you got nothing. And I thought the CGI Venom look was cool at the beginning. Uh, but by the end, when you get that symbiote fight, it just looks too CGI with Riot fighting Venom, and then even when you see their faces when they kind of creep inside, it does. They still look like CGI. I don't know. I wish they went more of like that it or not it, excuse me, the thing kind of look where even like the inside of a guy you kind of see his actual head and see like prosthetics around it. Everything was just CGI, so it just kind of looked fake by the end. So they kind of ruined it. I wish they had more prosthetic makeup and like actual slime and stuff like that and actual teeth for certain scenes to kind of emphasize the look. But they just went all CGI, and it just kind of ruined it by the end. So for me, I'm giving it a 6, and that's kind of like a low score for me because I usually my highest scores are the tech stuff, but here it's just underwhelming, underdeveloped, and they went for a certain look when they probably should have went more practical and prosthetic.
It's funny. You came up with your score of 6, and I generally agree with everything that you said as far as the look goes. I think it looks very fake. I think the ending battle, there are aspects of it that I somewhat enjoyed, but a lot of what took me out of it is some of the CGI and the fact that Riot is basically Venom except a different symbiote, and that's something that we've seen in a ton of movies. But the only difference is that I came to a very different score. I came to the score of a 4, just because for me we have seen what good superhero movies look like. And at this point, if you can't do this well, if you can't even make San Francisco look good, which Ant-Man and the Wasp, which I don't think is a technical marvel, but I certainly think it's better than this. And this movie is just very dark, and the way that Venom looks is both creepy and it feels funny and cartoony at the same time. And I know that people made fun of the look as soon as the trailer came out, and I think there's a good reason for that. I just don't think that this movie looks very good. And to me, what makes a superhero movie at least palpable is you have some sort of an iconic hero shot of some sort. I think the most famous version of this is in the Avengers, when you get that big sweeping shot of all the Avengers standing back to back with each other. And I think you even get some of that in some of the solo MCU movies. The big hero shot of either Thor or Iron Man or Captain America. You don't even get that with Venom, because Venom is kind of not a superhero, and it never comes together. The look never comes together cohesively, and that's why I'm giving this a 4.
Totally understandable. I think the one shot you mentioned that they were trying to go for was him at the top of the building, and Venom goes, "Ah, this isn't relaxing," and then all of a sudden he falls off. But it didn't feel like that because the CGI was just too distracting, and it was in the dark. And you can just, if they maybe had that shot in the daylight, you know what I mean? Like maybe it would have looked, clearer and better. But because of the CGI, they have to keep it dark. So that's kind of how it is.
Isn't it funny how almost every climax of an MCU movie takes place during the day? I can probably count on one hand the number that take place at night.
And there's a reason for that. It's that certain look, and it's for a reason. So let's go on to its legacy score. Obviously, its legacy is going to be the money. Like 815 worldwide, 200, what is it, 213 domestic, way above expectations, I believe. I was probably projecting this at like maybe 150 domestic, 500 worldwide, but I guess Venom has its fans, and I mentioned like it's out of the Rogues Gallery. Well, I'll say this. I'd say that Batman and Spider-Man have the two most popular Rogues Galleries, right? And out of the Spider-Man Rogues Gallery, the number one is Venom. So obviously he has his fans. And also because of the 90s show, a lot of nostalgia for that, and probably this thing about wanting to have a better Venom than Spider-Man 3. It's almost as if the fans willed it to be a success, whether or not it was going to be a good movie either way. And I guess it kind of caught people off guard in terms of the numbers, which it did for me as well. And the movie's not that good, so and I think that like even like home video, it's not as popular. I know streaming it's kind of decent, but I even take this as a joke. Like my friend who collects every single steel book of every single comic book movie, that's his gimmick, right? And I was like, "Are you really gonna buy Venom? You trashed this movie when I watched this with you." He was like, "Yeah, I know, but it's for the collection." So it's one of those things that like people will just buy it because it's part of the collection, but I don't think it'll do heavy home video numbers. I haven't seen the numbers lately, but in terms of its legacy, I think it's at its maximum peak of like its audience. You know what I mean? I think after this point, there'll be less people watching Venom, and in Venom 2, I think it's going to make less money. That's kind of my prediction for that, even though it's going to have Andy Serkis as director, which is crazy because he's also going to be the new Alfred at the same time. So crossing over. But yeah, I just feel like it's all about the money here. I have to give it its due. Like normally I would have gave this like a 3 or a 4, right? But I have to give it a 6 because it's moderate, successful in terms of its money. And
I'm also going to give this a 6 because this undoubtedly was one of the most financially successful superhero movies that we've ever had. And for whatever reason, people really embrace the idea of this movie, even though I personally do not like it. I think this movie has done a lot of things, both positive and negative. It has given Sony enough confidence to want to put Spider-Man into its own universe again, and at some point perhaps break away from the MCU. I think it has made Kevin Feige reconsider whether or not Venom is going to be a part of the MCU, and I actually think that is a distinct possibility that is going to happen. I think there is the possibility of Tom Hardy's Venom being a part of the MCU, and I think just for that possibility existing, I do have to give this movie its due. And we'll talk more specifically about Andy Serkis, but I think the one thing that Venom 2 will have going for it is that they did Venom by himself, and now they're going to introduce Carnage, and I think people are going to want to see that. And plus, Woody Harrelson, I think, is the kind of person that can bring people into the theater, and for that reason, I think Venom 2 does have the potential for success. Is it going to be as successful as the first one? I don't think so, but I was very wrong about how well this movie would do. So take anything I say with a grain of salt. So my total legacy score is a 6. My total overall score is a 19.
all right, minus 25, so the combined score is 44. Not exactly in the pile of shame, somewhere below the middle. That's kind of where it should be. And, it is what it is. And I guess with Andy Serkis, I'm more of a fan of him as an actor than a director, and I really haven't seen much of his directing work. But if he can translate that from his performances, I have a good feeling that maybe he can potentially do like a better movie. And probably won't that it won't be that hard to probably make a better movie than this one. But we'll see how it does box office wise, because we'll see. There's a lot of elements in play, and a lot of things can change in the next year. So let's go on to the burning questions. Number one, what kind of accent do you think Tom Hardy was going for?
I think he was going for a bizarro New York accent because I think he knew that he was in a B movie, so he tried to turn everything up to 11, and that's what he was going for.
Yeah, I get that same feeling too because he's supposed to be from New York. He was exiled allegedly from New York, so it's this weird kind of like immigrant New York accent. I want to say, you know what I mean? Just kind of like a hodgepodge of different things coming together with a sort of like Boston twang a little at times. Number two, do you think it's possible that Carlton Drake is Flash Thompson's father, thus tying in the MCU?
I don't think that's what they're going for. I do not think that this movie exists in the same universe as the MCU, and I'll explain more about that when we get to burning question number 5, but I don't think we're in the same universe yet.
Okay, yeah, I kind of thought about this as like one way to tie him in because there's always that mystery of who Flash Thompson's father is, and he's obviously rich. So I was like, oh, maybe they're kind of like doing a subtle thing here, but the time wise, it could have possibly happened. Riz Ahmed was born in '81, so it's not like impossible. But I think it's a no. But I thought it was like an interesting possible connection that you never know. Number three, even with Andy Serkis set to direct the sequel, what's your excitement level for the sequel?
I would say probably a 5 or a 6. I have watched Andy Serkis's directorial debut, which was Mowgli, which is basically an adult version of the Jungle Book. You can find it on Netflix. So if you are curious to see what Andy Serkis is like, that is very accessible to you at this point. I would definitely check it out as a curiosity. I don't think the movie is particularly great. I think there are some elements that work, and the elements that you would expect to work in an Andy Serkis directed movie are exactly what work. I think the motion capture and some of the visuals are very good, but I think some of the storytelling is not as good. For me, I think this movie comes down to the screenplay more so than the direction. I think Andy Serkis is going to be much more competent as far as tone, but if there is not a good screenplay, then Andy Serkis matters a lot less. I would actually be much more excited if Andy Serkis was Carnage than if he was directing the movie.
God, I agree with you on that one, but my excitement level is kind of like a 3. I just feel like at this point, with all this MCU stuff and the connectivity and the strength of Marvel and its connective tissue with all the other movies, If it's not going to be connected, I'm just not going to care. So right now, at this point, with no announcement of any other connections to the MCU, I'm going with the three on that one, just because I want stuff to connect and I want things to make sense now. And just the ambiguity, it's just kind of like ridiculous at this point. You got Jameson's son in there. Come on, man, give us Jameson, right? Number 4. What did Woody Harrelson do with his paycheck from this movie?
I do not think that Woody Harrelson's paycheck was that big from this movie. I think the idea is that they brought him in for this big cameo at the end, and the paycheck for Venom 2 is the one that is going to be the big enchilada, so to speak. So my guess is that his paycheck was not very big for this one. Maybe he got like $50,000 to $100,000. So perhaps put some money into the stocks. Perhaps he just bought weed. I mean, that's a distinct possibility. I'm just going to go with he bought himself a nice bong.
Wow, you stole my answer, Jerome, but I guess you know me too well. But I'll change my answer, and I'll go with he bought some vape pens, some extract, and maybe some, edibles to go to Disneyland, like I did. Number 5, what are the odds that Tom Holland's Spider-Man appears in Venom 2?
So I've actually thought about this, even aside from this question, because regardless of how interested I am in Venom 2, I think it is going to happen. Spider-Man and Venom are going to interact. I do not think that it is going to happen in Venom 2. I think that Disney and Sony they either have put this in writing or there is a gentle person's agreement that they are not going to have Spider-Man and Venom 2. I think it is much more likely that you see Venom in the third Spider-Man movie, because I think when you look at 2021, 2020 is not going to be a big year for the MCU because you've only got Black Widow, which is going to be fine. You've got Winter Soldier and Captain Falcon, which I think is going to be perfectly serviceable. I'm excited for the Eternals, but again, I think that's going to be more of an origin story. I think 2021, things are going to go wild. You've got WandaVision, you've got Doctor Strange, and you've got Spider-Man back to back to back. I think what happens in those three projects are going to change the MCU dramatically, because I think we are officially going to get introduced to the concept of multiverses, and that is how Spider-Man and Venom are going to be integrated into one universe.
I like that idea, how one kind of piggybacks off the other and cause and effect, and we know that Wanda is going to be in Doctor Strange 2 in the multiverse, and we already know the multiverse is coming, so great timing on that one. I think you might be right, so we'll see. But my odds for Venom 2, at this point, I would say it maybe like 4-1. Like it's pretty strong. You know what I mean? Like
I would say 10-1. If you're gonna make me nail it down to numbers, I would say 10-1. I don't think if they announce that Venom is going to be integrated into the MCU officially at some point, then that number is going to go down significantly. But I think that they're going to try to keep things separated, because I think the draw of Venom 2 is going to be Andy Serkis directing and Carnage. If they do anything with Spider-Man, it would be in an end credit sequence. Spider-Man is not going to be in the movie proper.
I get that. I think it's going to be an end credit sequence as well. But the reason I say 4-1 is only because of the recent deal over the summer, and there's a lot of details that weren't, shown to the public. And I think this could have been one of those bargaining chips. I mean, if I'm Sony, like I would totally play this as like a bargaining chip. Like you give me Tom Holland for Venom 2, just in a small appearance, to make some connectivity to the other movies. Just give us that. That seems like something reasonable that Sony would put on the table. And if I'm, the president of Sony or whatever, that's something that I want. So I think it's 4-1 for me. If it's money line odds, I don't know, plus 200, plus 175. Let's call it that. So. Because recently I took some trips to Vegas. I won some money, so I wanted to shout that out. My odds on betting on the finals and the World Series this year, 2 for 2. So there you go. Next week, what do we got? I think we're sticking with the Spider-Man theme, correct?
Next week, we are going to be reviewing Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, and I think we undersold this movie tremendously. I am very much looking forward to rectifying what our review last year, because I think that this is going to be the first Spider-Man movie to go into our pantheon, because I think that this movie is one of the most unique projects that has ever been done. I think from an animation standpoint, it is probably one of the best non-Pixar animated movies ever created, computer animation, and I'm really looking forward to talking about it.
Me too, and the soundtrack's amazing. We'll talk about that next week, but it really gets me emotional, man. Just seeing some of those scenes again. I can't wait to watch. It'll be like my fifth or sixth time in the last year watching that movie, so I can't wait and break it down and all the little things and all the little Easter eggs we can talk about. So until then, thank you for listening. Listen to us next week. I'm Brian, and you're listening to Jerome, and we'll see you again next week. And who's got the last word?
I guess I do. I was going to make a joke about being a turn in the wind, but you stole my thunder on that one.
Well, you stole my joke about the bong, so there you go.
So that we're even. Just end the podcast. No ending joke this time.